Montana Territory, 1878. The storm arrived without warning, much like most troubles in Isaac Lowery's life. Rain pounded the tin roof of his modest cabin as he stared at the crumpled letter in his hands, reading it for the third time. The feeble light from his oil lamp cast long shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the home he'd built with his own hands over the past 3 years. "This is madness," he muttered, running his fingers through his sandy brown hair. At 25, Isaac had carved out a decent living as a rancher outside of Whitehorn. 15 head of cattle, 2 horses, and 40 acres of land to his name. It wasn't much compared to the sprawling operations owned by the cattle barons, but it was his. And now, a woman he'd never met was coming to marry him. Isaac had written to the mail-order bride agency in a moment of weakness 3 months ago, after his best friend's wedding had left him feeling the sting of his solitude more sharply than usual. He'd forgotten about it entirely until the reply arrived last week, informing him that Miss Hannah Taylor would be arriving on the Thursday stage from St. Louis, tomorrow's stage. He crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fire. The flames caught the edge, slowly consuming his momentary folly. Isaac believed the frontier was no place for a proper lady. His own mother had withered away out here, the harshness of Montana winters and the isolation grinding down her city-bred spirit until consumption finally took her when he was 12. His father had followed 2 years later, leaving Isaac to make his own way in the world. "The frontier kills what's soft," his father had told him once, "and women are meant for softer places than this." Isaac had taken that lesson to heart. He needed no companionship beyond his horses and his neighbor Jade's occasional visits. Love was a luxury for men in civilized places, not for those scratching survival from unforgiving land. What he wanted, what he needed, was simply to make his ranch profitable enough to sell in a few years. Then perhaps he could return to somewhere civilized and think about a family. The letter now fully consumed by flames, Isaac pulled his boots off and stretched out on his narrow bed. Tomorrow he would meet this woman at the stage, explain the mistake, and send her back east with enough money for her return journey. It was the only decent thing to do. The Whitehorn stage depot was little more than a wooden platform adjoining the general store. Isaac arrived early, dressed in his cleanest shirt and trousers, his usual cowboy hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the morning sun. His light stubble was freshly trimmed, and he'd even splashed water on his face and combed his hair, common courtesy for the poor woman who'd traveled so far based on his foolish impulse. Waiting on the eastbound Isaac, called Martin, the depot manager. "Yes, sir, got some business arriving." "Heard tell there's a lady passenger. That your business?" Martin's weathered face cracked into a knowing grin. News traveled fast in small towns. Isaac shifted uncomfortably, just doing a favor for a friend. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, a dust cloud announcing its arrival long before the vehicle itself came into view. Isaac's stomach knotted as it drew closer. How exactly did one tell a woman who'd traveled over 1,000 miles that she'd wasted her journey? The coach rattled to a stop, and the driver secured the brake before climbing down to open the door. An elderly gentleman emerged first, followed by a drummer with his sample case. And then, a slender hand appeared, accepting the driver's assistance. The woman who stepped down seemed to bring the noise of the depot to a standstill. She was young, perhaps 22, with honey blonde hair pinned beneath a modest blue bonnet that matched her travel-worn dress. Despite the dust of travel, there was no hiding her beauty, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the clear blue of a mountain stream. But what struck Isaac most was the slight limp as she took her first steps on Whitehorn soil and the walking cane she leaned upon. Their eyes met across the platform, and Isaac felt something shift in the world around him. "Mr. Lowery," her voice carried a slight southern accent. Isaac removed his hat. "Miss Taylor, I presume." "Hannah Taylor." She extended her gloved hand with a dignity that seemed incongruous with their dusty surroundings. "I believe you were expecting me." Every word of his practiced speech evaporated. "Yes, ma'am." "I was." As he helped collect her trunk and carpet bag, Isaac couldn't help but notice how the other passengers averted their eyes from her cane, as though her impairment was something shameful. Hannah, however, moved with a determined grace that suggested she'd long ago made peace with her condition. "The ranch is about 4 miles outside town," he said, loading her belongings into his wagon. "Not much to look at, but the land's good." Hannah nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts as Isaac helped her onto the wagon seat. The cane rested across her lap, her fingers tracing the worn wooden handle. "You did not mention your injury in your letters," Isaac said, immediately regretting his bluntness. "And you did not mention your intention to send me back east upon my arrival," she replied evenly. Isaac's head snapped toward her. "How did you? Your expression when I stepped down from the coach told me everything I needed to know." Her voice remained calm, but her knuckles whitened around the handle of her cane. "I understand if my condition makes me unsuitable. Many men feel that way." The road stretched before them, rutted and dusty. Isaac flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward. "It's not that," he said, though even to his own ears the denial sounded weak. "It's just, this life is hard enough for people without," he trailed off, unable to find words that wouldn't wound. "Without defects," Hannah supplied, her tone sharp but not unkind. "I was going to say challenges," Isaac corrected. "The nearest doctor is 2 days' ride. The winters are brutal. Most women who come out here from the east don't last more than a year before they're begging to go back." Hannah gazed out at the vast landscape unfolding around them. Rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the summer grass golden beneath an endless blue sky. "I am not most women, Mr. Lowery," she said quietly, "but I understand if you wish to dissolve our arrangement." Isaac found himself at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. The decent thing would still be to send her back, more so now, knowing her physical limitations. And yet, something in her dignified bearing and direct gaze made him hesitate. "We should at least discuss it properly," he found himself saying, "after you've rested from your journey." Hannah's smile was small but genuine. "That seems fair." The cabin came into view as they crested the final hill. It was a simple structure, one main room with a small lean-to addition Isaac had built last autumn. A corral stood nearby with his horses, and beyond that his small herd grazed in the valley below. It wasn't much, but the sight of it always filled Isaac with quiet pride. "It's lovely," Hannah said, and the sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "It's modest," he corrected, helping her down from the wagon. "But it's mine." Isaac carried her trunk inside, setting it near the stone fireplace. The cabin was clean but Spartan, a table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers, a cooking area, and his bed in the corner. "You'll take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep in the lean-to until we sort things out." Hannah stood in the center of the room, taking in her surroundings with an expression Isaac couldn't quite read. Her cane tapped softly against the wooden floor as she moved to the small window, gazing out at the landscape. "How did it happen?" Isaac asked, the question escaping before he could consider its propriety. Hannah didn't turn from the window. "Polio when I was 16. I was fortunate, many die and others lose the use of their limbs entirely. I merely walk with difficulty." "I'm sorry," Isaac said, meaning it. "Don't be. I've had 6 years to make my peace with it." She turned to face him, her expression direct. "But I should be clear, Mr. Lowery, if you're looking for someone to pity, I'm not that woman. I can cook, clean, sew, and work as hard as any woman with 2 good legs. I simply do it differently." The sun was setting, painting the mountains in hues of gold and purple. Isaac built a fire while Hannah unpacked some of her belongings. The domestic tableau felt strange to him after so many years of solitude. Over a simple meal of beans and salt pork, they began to truly talk. Hannah spoke of her life in Tennessee, of losing her parents in the war, of surviving with an aunt who passed away the previous winter. With no family and limited prospects, becoming a mail-order bride seemed the most practical solution, she explained, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "And you weren't concerned about marrying a stranger?" Isaac asked. "I was more concerned about remaining alone in a world that has little use for women like me." Her directness was refreshing. "Your letters were kind. You spoke of the land with such passion. I thought perhaps there might be a place for me here." Isaac felt ashamed of his earlier thoughts. "The land is the only thing I've ever truly loved," he admitted. "My father taught me that everything else was a distraction from survival." "And do you still believe that?" Hannah's blue eyes seemed to see right through him. Isaac considered the question carefully. "I don't know anymore." That night, lying on his bedroll in the lean-to, listening to the occasional creaks from the cabin as Hannah settled in, Isaac found himself more conflicted than he'd ever been. The practical part of him still insisted she would be better off returning east. but something else, something he thought he'd buried alongside his parents, whispered that perhaps the frontier didn't have to mean isolation. The next morning, Isaac woke to the smell of biscuits baking. He found Hannah at the stove, her cane propped against the wall as she worked. She'd arranged her hair in a simple braid down her back and exchanged her travel dress for a practical blue calico. "You didn't need to cook," he said. "If I'm to stay even temporarily, I'll earn my keep," she replied, setting a plate before him. "I trust you slept well." Well enough. The biscuits were better than anything he'd managed in years of bachelor cooking. "These are good." "Thank you," she sat across from him, her own plate modest. "I thought perhaps today you might show me the ranch. If I'm to make an informed decision about staying, I should see what I'd be agreeing to." Isaac nodded, surprised by her practicality. "There's not much to see, but we can ride out after breakfast." He saddled his gentlest mare for Hannah, worried about how she would manage. But she surprised him again, adapting her mounting technique to accommodate her weaker leg, using her stronger one and upper body strength to pull herself up with minimal assistance. Once in the saddle, she seemed as natural as any ranch-raised woman. "My father raised horses before the war," she explained, noting his expression. "I've been riding since before I could walk properly." They rode the boundaries of his property, Isaac pointing out his plans. Where he hoped to expand the herd, the creek that never dried even in drought years, the sheltered valley that protected the cattle from the worst winter storms. "You've chosen well," Hannah observed as they rested the horses on a ridge overlooking the property. "This land has good bones." "Good bones." That's what my father would say about promising land. Good bones like a well-built house. The foundation is solid. Isaac found himself smiling. "I like that." A companionable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the valley below. The cattle grazed peacefully, dark dots against the golden grass. "I had a brother," Hannah said suddenly, "younger than me. He died in the war, just 17. After that, my mother simply gave up living. My father followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Isaac said, understanding the loss all too well. "My point is," Hannah continued, "I know about grief and hardship. I've faced more than my fair share, so when you worry about whether I can handle frontier life." She turned to face him, her blue eyes intense. "I've already weathered storms that would break many people." Isaac studied her face, the quiet determination, the absence of self-pity, the resilience etched in the set of her jaw. For the first time, he saw beyond her physical limitations to the strength within. "I believe you," he said simply. They returned to the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened. Hannah insisted on preparing dinner while Isaac tended to evening chores. The domesticity felt foreign but not unwelcome. Over their meal, Isaac found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone, about his mother's love of poetry, his father's skill with horses, the dreams he harbored of making the ranch into something that would have made them proud. "They would be," Hannah said. "You've built something from nothing. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," Isaac replied with a self-deprecating smile. Hannah laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face and lightened something in Isaac's chest. "Perhaps both." 3 days passed in this manner, each one establishing a rhythm between them that felt increasingly natural. Hannah proved her claim about working as hard as any woman. Despite her limitations, she kept the cabin immaculate, cooked meals that made Isaac's simple fare seem paltry in comparison, and even helped with lighter ranch tasks that didn't require much mobility. On the 4th morning, Isaac returned from checking the herd to find Hannah sitting on the porch, sewing a tear in one of his shirts. The sight struck him with unexpected force, the slant of morning light on her hair, the graceful movement of her hands, the quiet contentment in her expression. Something stirred in him that he couldn't name or perhaps didn't want to. "We should talk," he said, settling beside her on the porch step. Hannah set aside her sewing. "Yes, I suppose we should." "I haven't been honest with you," Isaac began. "When I wrote to the agency, I was lonely, but I convinced myself that was weakness, that I didn't truly need anyone. And now I'm not sure what I believe anymore." He looked out at his land, the mountains beyond. "I still think this life is hard. I still worry that you might come to regret coming here." "That's my risk to take, isn't it?" Hannah countered. "Unless you're simply looking for a gentle way to tell me you find me unsuitable." "No," Isaac said firmly. "That's not it at all." "Then what is it?" Isaac struggled to articulate the conflict within him. "I'm afraid," he finally admitted. "Afraid that I'll fail you, that I don't know how to be anything other than alone." Hannah was silent for a long moment. "I understand fear," she said finally. "After I recovered from polio, I was afraid to leave my room, afraid people would stare or worse, pity me, afraid I'd never have a normal life." "What changed?" "I realized fear was a prison I built myself." She reached over hesitantly and placed her hand over his. "Sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and moving forward anyway." Her touch was warm, steady. Isaac looked down at their hands, her small but capable, his rough from work, and felt something inside him shift. "I'd like you to stay," he said quietly. "Not out of obligation or pity or practicality, but because these past few days have been the best I've had in years." Hannah's smile bloomed slowly, like a sunrise. "I'd like that too. But I think we should take our time," Isaac continued. "Get to know each other properly before we talk about marriage." A courtship, Hannah's eyes sparkled with amusement. "How very proper of you, Mr. Lowery." Isaac felt his cheeks warm. "Seems only right." As summer progressed into autumn, Isaac discovered what it meant to court someone on the frontier. They worked side by side during the days, and in the evenings they talked. Hannah shared books she'd brought from Tennessee, poetry his mother would have loved, stories that transported them far from their isolated cabin. Isaac taught Hannah about the land, the signs of changing weather, the habits of the wildlife that shared their valley. He built her a proper bedroom, extending the cabin so she would have privacy while maintaining her dignity. The construction gave him purpose beyond the daily ranch work, and Hannah's appreciation of his efforts warmed something long cold within him. Word spread through the scattered community about Isaac's mail-order bride, and neighbors who rarely visited found reasons to stop by. Hannah charmed them all with her warmth and intelligence, never allowing her disability to define her. Through their eyes, Isaac began to see his home differently, not as a lonely outpost, but as the beginning of something with deeper roots. The first autumn storm caught them returning from Whitehorn after purchasing supplies. Dark clouds gathered suddenly, and the temperature plummeted as wind whipped across the plains. By the time they reached the halfway point to the ranch, rain was falling in icy sheets. "We need to find shelter," Isaac shouted over the howling wind. "There's a line shack about a quarter-mile east." Hannah nodded, her face pale with cold but determined. They diverted toward the simple shelter Isaac maintained for just such emergencies. By the time they reached it, both were soaked to the skin, and Hannah's teeth chattered audibly. Inside, Isaac worked quickly to light a fire in the small stove while Hannah huddled beneath the single blanket stored there. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a narrow cot, a stove, and a rough-hewn table and chair. "Your dress is soaked through," Isaac said once the fire was blazing. "You'll catch your death." He turned his back to give her privacy, digging through his saddlebags for the dry shirt he kept there. "You can wear this, I'll step outside while you change. And get even more drenched." Hannah's voice held a hint of amusement despite her shivering. "Just turn around, I'll be quick." Isaac faced the wall, acutely aware of the rustle of fabric behind him. The storm raged outside, rain drumming against the roof, wind finding every crack and crevice in the simple structure. "All right," Hannah said after a moment. "I'm decent." He turned to find her wearing his shirt, which hung past her knees like a dress. Her wet clothes were spread near the stove to dry, and her honey-blonde hair, freed from its pins, cascaded down her back in damp waves. In the flickering light of the stove, she looked ethereal and utterly human all at once. "You should get out of those wet things too," she said practically. "I'll turn around." Isaac changed quickly into his spare trousers, hanging his sodden clothes alongside hers. The small space felt intimate in a way that made his heart race, though he was careful to maintain a respectful distance as they both huddled near the stove's warmth. "Quite an adventure," Hannah remarked, her color returning as the chill left her bones. "I'm sorry," Isaac said. "I should have noticed the storm coming sooner." "Don't apologize for things beyond your control," she smiled at him. "Besides, I'm beginning to think the frontier has its charms. Like being trapped in a one-room shack during a thunderstorm." Hannah laughed, "Like the way the air smells just before rain, like seeing elk at sunrise. Like watching you when you think I'm not looking." The directness of her last words hung between them. Isaac felt something tighten in his chest. "And what do you see?" he asked, his voice low. "A man who's been alone too long. Who's forgotten that strength isn't about facing life's hardships by yourself." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "A man I'm coming to care for very deeply." The storm outside seemed to fade away as Isaac looked into her eyes. All the arguments he'd made to himself about the impracticality of love on the frontier, all the walls he'd built around his heart, seemed to crumble in that moment. "Hannah," he said, her name a revelation on his lips. He kissed her then, gently at first, then with a hunger that surprised them both. Her arms wound around his neck, and he pulled her closer, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, "and it terrifies me." Hannah's smile was radiant. Love should be a little terrifying. Otherwise, how would we know its worth? They spent the night in the shack, Isaac insisting Hannah take the narrow cot while he slept on the floor nearby. But their hands remained linked across the space between them, a connection neither wanted to break. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world and a changed relationship. As they rode back to the ranch, Isaac knew with certainty that Hannah Taylor had claimed a place in his life that could never be undone. 2 weeks later, the first snow fell, earlier than usual. Isaac had been preparing for winter, cutting firewood, smoking meat, ensuring the cattle had access to sheltered areas. Hannah had proven herself invaluable, putting up preserves from their garden and reinforcing the cabin against drafts with techniques she'd learned in Tennessee. They were making this place, this life together. On a crisp November morning, Isaac saddled his horse before dawn. "I need to check the herd in the north pasture," he told Hannah over breakfast. "The snow's deeper up there." "Be careful," she said, pressing a bundle of food into his hands. "The sky looks unsettled." Isaac kissed her goodbye, still marveling at the ease that had grown between them. They hadn't spoken of marriage again, but it hung in the air between them, an unspoken promise waiting for the right moment. The day passed quietly for Hannah. She cleaned the cabin, worked on a quilt she was making from scraps, and read from one of her books. As afternoon waned with no sign of Isaac, she began to worry. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and fresh clouds gathered on the northern horizon. By dusk, her concern had bloomed into fear. Isaac was never this late. Hannah bundled up in her warmest clothes and lit a lantern, hanging it from the porch post as a beacon. Then she waited, her eyes straining against the gathering darkness, her cane tapping a nervous rhythm on the wooden floor. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, relief flooded through her. But as the sound grew closer, she realized it was more than one horse, and they were moving at a gallop. 3 riders emerged from the darkness. Hannah recognized Jade Parker, their nearest neighbor, leading the group. Behind him, 2 men supported a slumped figure on horseback, Isaac. "Hannah," Jade called, "Isaac's hurt." "Found him near Cougar Ridge, horse spooked by something and threw him." The men carried Isaac inside, his face pale beneath a gash on his temple. His right leg was awkwardly angled, clearly broken. "We've sent for the doctor from Fort Benton," Jade explained as they laid Isaac on the bed. "But in this weather it could be days." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "Thank you for bringing him home. I can manage from here." "You sure?" Jade looked doubtful, his eyes flicking to her cane. "I'm sure," Hannah said firmly, "but if you could help me set that leg before you go, I'd be grateful." After the men departed, promising to return the next day to check on them, Hannah worked methodically. She cleaned Isaac's head wound, relieved to find it looked worse than it was. The broken leg was more concerning. With Jade's help, they'd set it and splinted it, but Isaac had regained consciousness during the process, his scream of pain searing itself into Hannah's memory. Now he lay in a fitful sleep, his breathing shallow, occasional moans escaping his lips. Hannah gave him laudanum for the pain, then settled beside the bed to maintain her vigil. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, clasping his hand. "We've only just found each other." The night stretched endlessly. Hannah dozed intermittently, jerking awake at Isaac's slightest movement. By morning, his skin burned with fever, and Hannah fought rising panic. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, spooned broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and prayed with an intensity that surprised her. 3 days passed in this manner. The doctor still hadn't arrived. delayed by a blizzard that swept through the territory. Jade and other neighbors checked in when they could, bringing supplies and offering assistance, but the bulk of Isaac's care fell to Hannah. Her leg ached constantly from the unusual activity, but she ignored it. She learned to move efficiently around the cabin despite her limitations, to conserve her strength for when Isaac needed her most. In the quiet hours of night, when his fever raged highest and delirium took him, she spoke to him of the future she imagined for them, children running in the summer grass, expanding the cabin as their family grew, growing old together on this land they both loved. "You must live," she told him, her voice fierce with determination, "because I cannot imagine this life without you in it." On the fourth night the fever broke. Hannah woke from an exhausted sleep to find Isaac watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice weak but lucid. Hannah smiled through sudden tears. "Where else would I be?" "I dreamed you left," he admitted, "that you realized this life was too hard, too dangerous." "Then it was just a fever dream," she said, pressing a kiss to his palm. "Because I'm exactly where I belong." Recovery was slow. The doctor finally arrived to properly treat the broken leg, confirming Hannah had done everything correctly. Isaac chafed at his confinement to bed, but Hannah was firm, threatening to tie him down if necessary when he tried to get up too soon. "You're formidable when crossed," he grumbled after one such confrontation. "Remember that when you're tempted to do something foolish," she replied, unable to hide her smile. Winter settled fully around them, snow piling against the cabin walls, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in the bucket overnight. Neighbors helped with the heavier ranch work, checking the cattle and ensuring the horses were properly cared for. In the enforced intimacy of their confinement, Isaac and Hannah grew closer still. They talked of their pasts without reservation now, of childhood dreams, of losses endured, of hopes still harbored. Isaac spoke of his parents with a warmth he'd never allowed himself before, as if sharing their memory with Hannah somehow kept them alive in a new way. By Christmas, Isaac could move around the cabin with crutches. Hannah had decorated with pine boughs and berries, and even managed to bake a simple cake with precious sugar saved for the occasion. "I have something for you," Isaac said after their modest Christmas dinner. Hannah watched curiously as he hobbled to the chest of drawers, retrieving a small wooden box from beneath his clothes. When he returned to the table, he seemed nervous in a way she hadn't seen before. "This was my mother's," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together. She said it reminded her that beauty could exist even in the harshest places." Hannah's breath caught as Isaac took her hand. "I know I'm not whole right now," he said, glancing down at his splinted leg, "and I know this life isn't easy. But these past months have taught me that I was wrong about so many things. The frontier doesn't have to mean loneliness. Strength isn't about facing hardship alone, it's about facing it together." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and certain all at once. "Hannah Taylor, will you marry me? Not because it's practical or because it's what we arranged, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, mindful of his injured leg. They clung to each other as snow fell softly outside, two souls who had found in each other what the world had tried to convince them they didn't deserve. They were married in the spring, when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers dotted the hills. The ceremony took place outside their cabin, with neighbors and even a few townspeople in attendance. Isaac stood straight and tall, his leg healed well enough to bear weight, though he would always carry a slight limp, a matching imperfection that he joked made them a perfect pair. Hannah wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from St. Louis. Her honey-blonde hair was adorned with white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of prairie roses. As she walked toward Isaac, leaning lightly on her cane, her face luminous with joy, he thought she had never looked more beautiful. "You've transformed my life," Isaac told her during their simple vows. "You've shown me that love isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength we possess." Hannah's voice was steady as she responded, "And you've given me a home not just in this place, but in your heart. I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings, whatever storms we must weather." That night, as husband and wife, they stood on their porch gazing at stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. Isaac's arm wrapped around Hannah's waist, supporting her as surely as she had supported him during his recovery. "Do you ever regret coming here?" he asked softly. Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder. "Not for a single moment. This land has good bones, remember, and so do we." As years passed, the Lowery ranch prospered. They added to the cabin until it became a proper home, with a wide porch where Hannah could sit and watch their two children, a son and daughter, play in the yard. Isaac's herd grew, and his reputation as a fair and hardworking rancher spread throughout the territory. Hannah became known for her generous spirit and quiet strength. She taught at the small schoolhouse in Whitehorn 1 day a week, riding in on her mare regardless of weather. Her disability never disappeared, but neither did it define her. The townsfolk who had once stared now saw only the capable woman who had helped transform a bachelor's hardscrabble existence into one of the most successful small ranches in the area. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Hannah to the ridge where they had first ridden together. The valley below was dotted with more cattle now, and the cabin had evolved into a comfortable home, but the essential beauty of the land remained unchanged. "I was so determined to be alone," Isaac mused, holding Hannah's hand as they sat side by side on horseback. "So convinced that love had no place on the frontier." Hannah smiled, the years having added character to her beauty rather than diminishing it. "And I was equally determined to prove that my limitations didn't make me unworthy of love." "We were both wrong," Isaac said, "and thank God for that." The sun dipped toward the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. As they turned their horses toward home, toward their children waiting with the neighbor who watched them, toward the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination, Isaac reflected on the strange paths that led people to their destinies. A broken leg, a limp, a mail-order-bride arrangement that could have ended before it began. All those perceived flaws and missteps had led to this, a love that had not just survived the frontier but had flourished there, transforming not just their lives but the very meaning of home. "Race you back," Hannah said suddenly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. And before Isaac could respond, she was off, riding with the confidence and joy that had captured his heart all those years ago. He followed, laughing, knowing that some races weren't about who finished first, but about the journey taken together. In a land that forgave little and took much, they had found the rarest treasure of all. A love as enduring as the mountains, as nurturing as the valleys, as expansive as the Montana sky above them.